Welcome to WooCommerce Live. This is episode 5 of season 3. I'm Jonathan Wold, and I lead community initiatives here at WooCommerce. And with me is my co-host, Noëlle Steegs. She's a developer and a volunteer here in the WooCommerce community. And today we're going to be talking about coding for beginners, which we're quite excited about. We're going to share our recommendations on how to think about that. And then we're going to jump in and do some live coding, which is always exciting. This is the thing I would just add to that is that with this beginner focus, we're not assuming that any of you have any prior experience. So if you've never tried any code or haven't thought about it before, this is perfect for you. After the episode, as always, we'll open it up for questions. So you can add your questions in the comment section on YouTube or on Facebook, and we'll look forward to getting to them after the main episode. So, all right. Noëlle, what are some of the wins that we have in the WooCommerce community this week?
This week, I want to give a shout out to Wold. I saw his post today, and he reached out and he said that if anyone needs help finding plugins for certain features, to shoot him a message. He says he would love to help. He does a lot of plugin reviews and testing, and he's gotten great at finding lightweight solutions. He says he doesn't spend so much time scrolling through the group, but he says if you message him, he'll do his best to help. So, how awesome is that?
That's fantastic. And I see a lot of that on the group, folks willing to help out. So shout out to Sean for doing that. And if you're not already a member of the Facebook group and into that, there's a lot of folks doing a lot of great things there. So that's fantastic. And I want to give a quick shout out to the Lima WooCommerce meetup. They are back up and running again. This is for our Spanish-speaking WooCommerce community. Highly recommend that if you haven't checked that out, or if you're interested in learning some Spanish. Attending the meetup is a great way to do that. So that is fantastic. All right, so we had a number of questions come in, and folks like Juan, Thomas, and Deborah asked the basic, all right, well, where do I start, or why would I want to do code? So let's start out with just kind of an overview of what code is and why it matters. So your website is doing a job for you, right? When you set up WordPress and WooCommerce, it's running and it's doing whatever you've configured it to do. The way that I find it helpful is to think about code as instructions that until you change something, your website will continue to follow. So code is like instructions for your site. Writing code is like creating new instructions for your site in a language that your site understands. So for WordPress, those languages include PHP, CSS, and JavaScript. And we'll be touching more on PHP and JavaScript, or CSS rather, later today. Those instructions that you write for your site tell it how to function, tell it how to look, and even can help it interact with other sites. So it's powerful. So why does it matter? The way that we think about code is it gives you just a lot of flexibility with what you can do, right? Like you can configure WooCommerce, WordPress out of the box, and there's so much that you can do with the built-in settings. And code just lets you take that to a whole other level. And it can seem intimidating. It can seem, because there's so much that you can do with it, but it doesn't have to be. It can start out very small and very simple and still be quite powerful. And when we think about one of the reasons like why to do that, when you compare the difference between like WordPress and WooCommerce versus the proprietary platforms, one of the big benefits and the values that you get is that you have access to the code and you can make changes to the code. And it's one of the big perks of it being open source and something that you can own and do what you want with. So there's a lot of value to it. So how do you think about it, especially if you've never done it before? We recommend that first and foremost that you be curious about it. It can seem intimidating, but if you look at it from a place of curiosity, of just wanting to learn more and see how things work, that, in my experience, and I think in Noëlle's and many others, is sort of what opens up the doors to possibilities. So start from a place of curiosity, and then just encourage you to experiment. Just try things out. There are a lot of safe ways to experiment, and especially when you're starting out, there's not much that can go wrong that you can't fix. If you're working, I'll just put a caveat here. If you're working on a live site, then I highly recommend that you take advantage, especially when you're first starting out, of a staging environment if your host provides one. Or if it doesn't, then you want to look at getting something up and running on your local environment, which can be, and we'll have a resource in the show notes on how to do that. Fantastic. So today, what we're going to be covering, we've picked 3 things. Noëlle, in just a moment, is going to explain CSS and show you some examples of using that. Then I'm going to talk about removing and changing elements in your product page or checkout. And then Noëlle is going to talk about how to add a new field to your product page. So we picked these examples as pretty basic, but enough to kind of open up a world of different possibilities. So I think you're going to like it. All right, well, let's jump to it. Noëlle, over to you to tell us what CSS is.
Awesome. Thanks, Jonathan. So CSS and why it matters, I would actually like to demonstrate very clearly why it matters. So I'll quickly share my screen with you to start off. So here's a demo shop, and now I am just going to quickly, you can see what it looks like now. Very minimal and nice and clean.
Nice screen.
And this is without CSS.
Yep.
Nice, right? So that is why CSS matters. Without CSS, the web would look terrible, like it did way back in the beginning. Luckily we're in 2021 and we can make websites look wonderful. And I definitely think, it's a great thing to experiment with. I mean, when I had my own store back in the day, CSS is the first code language I got into because I had a need for it. I had a theme and the theme made things look good, but I wanted to do something above and beyond. So I needed custom CSS. And I just started with small things, and by also finding snippets online or in the community and customizing that to my needs, and that's how I got, bit by bit, I got comfortable. So like Jonathan always says, be curious. I definitely was that. I loved experimenting with it. And one way you can preview things and experiment with it is the inspector. The inspector is, I'm going to be discussing the Chrome one specifically because I like to use Chrome for my browser. Firefox has a similar tool, which is excellent as well. So I find that most people use either or for when it comes to development and stuff. But the inspector is a really powerful tool that when you right click on your website and you click inspect, and now I wonder, of course, my little window is not, okay.
There you go, perfect.
There you go. So this has all the different elements on your page in it, and it allows you to preview, pre-code, change some styling, and just play around with that to get something as a base to basically work from. So, for example, if I wanted to take the shop heading and see what I did there, I clicked this little icon with the arrow, or with a pointer, I should say, and it allows you to hover over and and basically select anything you want to. I find that the easiest option. You can also look in here and unfold things until you have the right element, but I find this is my go-to, and I think you will find that easiest. So I click on the shop, and there is things here like font weight. Now, this theme uses something called variables, which is definitely advanced stuff. So I'm not going to explain that right now. But for example, let's customize the font size, for example. So if I say, for example, 50 pixels here, you can see it changes immediately here. So this, of course, is a very, very small example, and I could continue and say color, and I can change it to something, and you can kind of build up things like that, and then use that as a base.
And Noelle, could I just
Yes.
add here too? Like, the thing that's amazing about using the inspector is that all of this is happening locally. So you're not changing your actual site right now.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. I remember actually showing somebody this on Google as an example, and the person looked at me and said, "Did you just hack Google?" And I say, "No, this is just local in my browser." So yeah. So thanks for highlighting that, Jonathan. For those who aren't familiar. Right. So the place that I recommend you put your CSS, there are different places to do that, but what is going to be easiest and a really great tool is over here. You just click customize in the bar, and it brings you to the theme customizer.
Yep. And this is if you're logged into WordPress, you'll see that bar at the top.
Mm-hmm. And right here, you have an option saying additional CSS. And there you can also put your code in and preview it live. So, for example, if I take the shop heading again, and I take the same bit that has the font size in, and I will copy and paste that here. And then change the font size here. It automatically previews it, and you can save it here. So it depends on your workflow, so to say. What you find. I find some people find it easier to start in their inspector and then pull up customizer later. Some people do it in one go like this. Doesn't really matter, whichever you prefer, but it's definitely a super powerful tool to start exploring CSS.
And
yes.
Go ahead.
I also just wanted to show in the inspector a very nifty tool which helps you to experiment with colors and pick them. So if I type it here at the top where you say element style, it previews it on this specific thing, so without having to target a specific class. So say I start with color is blue, it takes keywords as well, and I click on this little blue thing, and then I can slide around this color, and I can go in here and I can change and preview colors depending on, I'm definitely not a designer, but I'm sure that, when you're in there, you will have a good feel for what looks really good with your site, and it allows you to just literally play around with it. So I think that could be useful in your CSS journey.
Excellent. What I wanted to just add there is that, as Noelle mentioned, there's a lot of ways to do this, and you could argue that there's a better practice of not putting it directly in the customizer. When you're starting out, though, this is a fantastic way to start. And ultimately, what we recommend is get that early experience, right? And this is a great way to do it. So there's many ways to write CSS, and you might hear about things like working with child themes, et cetera. Those are all good practices, but we don't want to see that hold you back from getting started. And so this is a nice accessible way that's built right in to WordPress.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely the one that's quickest to get up and running and start experimenting. Last but not least, I want to close off the CSS topic with something called media queries. And media queries are super powerful in helping you get the responsiveness of your site just so. So if you want to, change something, adjust the spacing of something, maybe on mobile only. So let me just make this a bit bigger so it's like a bit more clear. And then I will say add media, and then the max width. In this case, this is the one I like to use for smartphones on portrait. And I will take this and I will set that then to 50 and publish that. Now, when I preview, and that's all, it's the one last thing in the inspector that I will show you. Right here, you can toggle the devices with that. So right now we're on mobile, and as you can see, the font size is 50 pixels. But when I switch to a larger device, it's now 100. That's the basic of media queries, and you can, make things stack a certain way, or definitely, adjusting white space is something people often want to do. So that's definitely something you will want to dive into some
Awesome.
point. Yeah, some point.
So now that you've mastered CSS, that's an excellent overview, and you have some ideas about how to play with that now. Now we're going to switch over, and I'm going to show you my little demo environment over here. And one of the things that you're going to often want to do early on in your customization is remove things from WooCommerce or make some minor changes, right? And the general way that I encourage you to think about this is think about the changes that you want to make, and then you're going to go through the process of figuring out how to make that change, and then you experiment with doing it. And we're going to give you a couple examples. The tool that we're going to use, and that I recommend as a good starting point, is a little plugin called Code Snippets. And what this does is lets you create snippets of code that you can run directly from the WordPress admin. So this cuts out a lot of other steps that, again, can be best practices in terms of uploading files and version control, but are not necessary to getting started. So yes, and so we're going to show you some examples within this context. All right, so now an important concept for us to look at here is, in WordPress, we have three things. We have something called hooks, actions, and filters. So a hook, and I'm going to pull up a handy little guide here from a community member. So a hook is places in the code that you can hook into to make changes that you're wanting. These are often theme specific. So I'm showing the storefront theme on my side, and the storefront theme has these little hooks, and we'll include this reference in the show notes. And this is a visual guide showing you where the hooks show up in the code. So here's a familiar product page, and this is a hook for the WooCommerce single product summary. That's where the summary appears. And they're pretty self-explanatory. This one shows up before the add to cart form, for instance. And when we're wanting to do things, so we're working with these hooks, and there are two types of hooks. The first is a action, and actions allow you to add data or introduce new functionality. And the second is a filter that allows you to change sort of what's already there. And I'm going to show you some examples of this in practice and make this practical for you. So let's take an example. Let's go over to our demo environment here, and let's take this fantastic Woo the album. And let's say that we wanted to remove the SKU from showing up on the product page, right? It's a nice, simple example of change that we're like, all right, this is useful. I don't want to get rid of it entirely, but I don't want it to show up there. I just want to make it nice and clean. So I go into my snippets, and I've already prepared this. We'll drop some links to the code in the show notes, so you can get these yourself. So in Code Snippets, I've created some new code here, and I'm just going to talk through this briefly. So I've defined a new function. I've given it a name. And then what I've done here is I've added a small conditional check to make sure that we're not on the admin page and that we are on the product page. And since we're using a filter, that filter is called WC product SKU enabled. By default, that shows the SKU field, that enables it, right? And what we're wanting to do is take that filter and change it so that it's disabled. And that's what this return false does. Now, here's the good news about snippets. So if you study the comments, you can kind of understand the syntax, but early on, there's a lot of copy and pasting that you can do, right? So you don't need to understand every aspect of this. That will be something that comes with time. So this is an example of a snippet that is nice and simple. And then it hooks in here. It adds the filter to the hook, which is WC product SKU enabled. It adds our function to that. Okay, now let's see what happens when we turn it on. So it's now enabled. And if we refresh, you can see that the SKU is now gone. So nice basic example of how we would use that in practice. Let's look at our second example. So another thing that you might want to do is remove the coupon form. So if you wanted to just get rid of coupons entirely, you can go to your settings in WooCommerce and turn them off. But let's say that you wanted to just hide the coupon field from the checkout. So let's go to our cart and let's proceed to checkout. And let's say we wanted to just get rid of this, right? So we go over to our snippets. And in this case, this is all it takes. So remember we talked about actions. So actions are what WordPress uses to insert some new things. So in this case, that coupon form field is actually just a nice little action. So we're writing a tiny piece of code here that says remove action. We're removing the WooCommerce checkout form, coupon form, from the hook WooCommerce before checkout form. So when we save changes and activate, we can refresh our checkout and boom, it's gone. Nice and easy. And this is such a great example of just things to experiment with, right? Like you can now go and search for snippets and you can try things in here and see what happens and make little changes to them. It's a great way to experiment and just let your curiosity follow you. All right, now we're going to take it up a notch and look at adding something. Noëlle, why might you want to add something to WooCommerce?
So, of course, if you think of, for example, the product page, there's a lot of data that you can already enter in WooCommerce that will display, but maybe you want to add something to that. Maybe you want to tell people about, maybe you're selling, custom-made products, and you want to tell people how long it takes to make the product for you. It's just a simple example, but really, anything. Like I've seen shops where they have like a little legend with icons of, whether something is maybe sustainable or what kind of warranty it has or those kind of little things. That can really make a page more user-friendly. Yep. And an easy way or a simple way to start out with that is with Advanced Custom Fields, which is a free plugin in the plugin repository. And, as you can see, it's hugely popular. It has more than 1 million installations. And it basically allows you to add fields to, for example, the back end of your products. It can be all different types of fields. There can be images or text or you name it. But now I'm going to show a simple example of how to use Advanced Custom Fields for adding a note to your product page. And I've set this up and I will talk you through it. So over here you have custom fields. I have it already installed as a plugin. And I have created a field group saying product note. And then I went ahead and added this field here. So I gave it a name. This was automatically populated, but you can customize it if needed. And I chose the field type. In this case, I want somebody to have more room to maybe enter a bit longer text. So I chose for text area, which allows for a paragraph. I can include instructions if I want to, but I didn't. I just went for a very basic setup. You can make it required if you want to. So that just creates the field, right? Now we want to see where we want to display that. And for my example, I said the post type must be equal to product. And the taxonomy, in this case, the category, is equal to hoodies. because I see time and time again in the Facebook group, people want something conditionally. They want it on this product category, for example, only. So that's why I'm showing this in this example. These settings, you don't need to touch them for basic setup. I like having mine on the side because it's a note field and they are typically on the right, but that's about it. And, I click publish and then went to the back end of my product. And had a product note field right here. So I entered my text here, and then I wanted to display it on the product page, obviously. So here's my product page in the hoodie category. And I think it would be a good place to insert, like maybe after the add to cart button, to add a little note here. So I went ahead and I wrote a snippet. The snippet will also be available to you guys in case you want to take it and experiment with it yourself. I use code snippets for this to make it easy to add to the site, as Jonathan described. This is what it looks like. In short, it checks whether the product is in the category hoodies. Then it gets the content of the note field that I created, checks if there is text in it. And if there is, it shows it onto the page. And how I determine where on the page, that's where the hooks come in. And, you'll refer to the visual hook guide, the single product page visual hook guide for this, where you can say, okay, I want it after the button. So I look here. This one says after add to cart button. So then that's the one that I use for the positioning. And I've added notes to the snippet as well to help you understand this. So then when I activate it and I refresh my page over here, there you go. There is the note. And, I can obviously enter anything I want to here. It's really great. I added in the code, you will see I wrapped it in what's called a paragraph tag, and I added a class. Why? Because it allows me to inspect and go over it. And with its own class, I can now customize it to my liking. So I hope that wasn't too fast-paced. I see we're running a little bit low on time, but if you have further questions about this, of course, feel free to ask. But I hope this will get you as excited about this as I was, because I clearly remember all the opportunity it opened up for me, and it was just such.
Well, just cut out for a moment there. Perfect. It's like magic. It really is like magic once you get to it, right? So our hope today was just sort of open it up a little bit and encourage you guys with a basis for experimenting. So a few reminders: be curious. There are a lot of great resources out there. I'll share a couple with you really quick. On the more advanced but still really useful side, we have this developer resource, developer.woocommerce.com. Great place for curiosity because it references the documentation, so you can go in and look at the WooCommerce hooks and filters and get some explanation for how that works. Also, I want to do a shout out to Rodolfo over at Business Bloomer. He's put together some great online courses that you can use to go into these things further, and really appreciate if he's put a lot of tutorials out there and reference guides. So we've quite appreciated that. And last but not least, keep in mind that we are all here as a community to help you. One of the great benefits of WordPress and WooCommerce being open source is that we all recognize the value in helping each other figure these things out. So if you start to work on something and you get stuck, go into the Facebook group. You can go on Slack, wherever you'd like, even on Reddit, and you can ask for help. And my recommendation is to explain what you're trying to accomplish and why, and then share a code snippet. And you can use There's any number of tools, but one I recommend is using Gist over on GitHub. I'll show you what that looks like real quick. It's just gist.github.com. You have to be signed in, but GitHub is a tool that a lot of us use, and you can go in and create a public gist and drop your code in there, and that makes it easy for us to be able to see it. So that's fantastic. And I think that's about it. A special thanks to Anna, our producer in the back, and for helping make all this happen, and for all the questions that you guys have sent in. And that's going to be a wrap for this episode, and we will jump over to Q&A next.